just wanted to say I'm very happy to be here. Shout out to my dad and grandpa who are here tonight. And we are going to get started tonight with our event. So, today I will be introducing the wonderful Miss Ericka Huggins. Ericka Huggins is a human rights activist, poet, educator, Black Panther leader, and former political prisoner. For the past 37 years, she lectured throughout the United States and internationally. Her extraordinary life experiences have enabled her to speak personally and eloquently on issues relating to the physical and emotional well-being of women, children, and youth, while educating over incarceration and the role of the spiritual practice in sustaining activism and promoting social change. As a result of her 14 tenure as a leading leader of the Black Panther Party, the longest of any woman in leadership, she brings a unique, complete, yes, please, applause. She brings a unique, complete, and honest perspective to the challenges and successes of the Black Panther Party and its significance today. Ericka's desire to serve humanity began in 1963 when she attended the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. There, she committed to moving from the sidelines to the front lines in the global human rights movement. In 1968, at age 18, she became a leader of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party with her husband, John Huggins. 3 weeks after the birth of their daughter in 1969, John Huggins was killed and Huggins was widowed. After returning to New Haven, Connecticut to be with John's family, Ericka was invited by community members and Yale University to open a party chapter there. She accepted the invitation. In May 1969, Huggins and fellow party leader Bobby Seale were targeted and arrested on conspiracy charges, sparking Free Bobby, Free Ericka rallies across the country. The resulting trial, one of the longest and most celebrated of the era, spawned several books. While awaiting trial for 2 years before charges were dropped, including time in solitary confinement, Huggins taught herself to meditate as a means to survive incarceration. From this time on, she would incorporate spiritual practice into her daily life, her community work, and teaching as a tool for change, not only for herself, but for all people. A lifelong writer and poet, upon release from prison in 1971, Ericka became writer and editor for the Black Panther Intercommunal News Service. In 1974, her book of poetry chronicling her experience of imprisonment and liberation, insights, and poems co-authored with Huey P. Newton was published. Her poetry and writings have appeared in numerous magazines and books. From 1973 to 1981, Huggins was director of Oakland's Community School, a groundbreaking community-run child development center and elementary school founded by the Black Panther Party. She created the vision for innovative curriculum for the school, which became a model for and predecessor for the charter school movement. In 1976, Ericka Huggins became both the first woman and first Black person to be appointed to the Alameda County Board of Education. In 1979, 10 years after she was released from prison, Huggins returned to California state, county, and federal prisons and jails to share her experiences of yoga and meditation, and continued this work with adults in addition to her continued to teach in homes for foster and adopted children and pregnant teens. For the past 25 years, she has also taught relaxation and mindfulness in California youth correctional facilities, in addition to many Northern California public schools, districts, and community colleges. In 1990, height of public awareness of HIV and AIDS, Huggins was the first woman practical supporter, volunteer coordinator at the world-renowned Shanti Project. She also developed a unique volunteer support program for women and children with HIV in the Tenderloin and Mission districts of San Francisco. During her time at Shanti Project, Huggins helped develop citywide programs for the support of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth with HIV and AIDS. From 2003 to 2011, she was a professor of women and gender studies at San Francisco State University and California State University, East Bay. From 2008 to 2015, she was a professor of sociology and African American studies in the Peralta Community College District. And currently, Ericka is a facilitator with World Trust, an Oakland-based organization. World Trust uses films that document through story the impact of systems of racial inequality. These films are tools that foster conversation about race and other structural inequities. Yes. In addition, Ericka Huggins is available as a keynote speaker through the Institute for Democratic Education and Cultural Speak Now. So, after all of this, I am finally happy to introduce Ericka Huggins.
Thank you, Lauren.
Of course, thank you. So, anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Yes, I love these flowers, and I can't see you. Oh, you know what? Let's move the table back a little.
Okay, we're moving the table because Ericka Huggins said move the table.
No, it's not like that.
It is most definitely like that.
Okay, all right.
Whew.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Good. So shall we get into the questions?
Sure.
Okay.
But first, I want to thank everybody for being here. And please, it's nice if you sit forward so that I know that you know that I'm not contagious. Or I don't, but you are, right? Okay. But, we're going to engage. The title of this talk was written as Social Justice and Civic Engagement. So we won't just be sitting here all evening talking. You'll be engaging as well. So if you can move forward, that would be great. Okay, and so yes, let's go for it.
Okay, so we will just dive right into our first question, which is, what is civic engagement?
I'm so glad you asked. I love to do this thing. I love to look up words. Do you ever do that?
No. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Not like on a leisure basis, but yes.
Well, when I'm using words, I like to look up the words I'm using. And I use this really fun thing called visual thesaurus. And the reason I like it is because I'm visual. I think that we're often chided for the way that we learn, for the way that we remember, and for the way that we talk, for the way that we assess, analyze, and define our world. And I think people of color understand what I'm saying. I also think that women of every color understand what I'm saying. And so I like visual thesaurus, and you can try it free. You have to pay for it if you really want it. But I love to try it free every time I try it. And I looked up civic. Guess what it said?
I'm dying to know, please.
Cultural. The participation of a person in the activities of their city as an individual. Isn't that interesting? Because there are some individuals that are never invited to participate in the civic anything, right? So I thought that was interesting, and then I looked up engagement, and of course it had the typical things like the thing before marriage, participation, those kinds of things. But the one I loved most was the word involution. It's not a word I use in a sentence regularly, but it means to be actively involved in any activity of a group. And once again, I was thinking civic engagement, which was Ashley Simon, thought that this should be a part of the title of the talk. And I was thankful to Ashley, because civic engagement, we throw that phrase around a lot. We don't know what the heck we're talking about. In actuality, what we're talking about is having all people, no matter who they are, no matter their age, the shade of color their skin might be, their size or shape, their sexual orientation, their gender, their class, their ethnicity, it goes on, their ability, their citizenship in this country or others. That all people are meant to be engaged as individuals. And so then I looked up social, because social justice is the other part, civic engagement and social justice. And social is that, it said multi-ethnic. It's like, whoa, visual thesaurus. Social is well, yes it is. Because if you take a look at the room, you don't have to look into anybody's eyes in a deep and meaningful way. But just look at just turn around and look at people. Just glance. It's okay. You don't have to spend a lot of time. So, and you can see them, right, Lauren?
Yeah, y'all look good.
And not everybody looks alike, right?
Absolutely not.
And even though we are both women of African descent, we don't look alike.
No.
Even though I did wear that hairstyle the day I got out of prison.
I told you.
It's the truth. I'm gonna give her a picture.
Yes.
So, and we don't often think that this is our duty, to be socially engaged as part of a city. We walk by intentionally not wanting to see people, not wanting to say hello. Or we tell ourselves we don't know how. We don't know what to say. And we think we know people's stories by reading their bodies, you know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know any more about you than you told me today, which is a lot in a short period of time. But I can't claim to know why women and gender studies struck you as a major, even though that I taught it for years. I can listen to you though, right? So I started thinking about how we don't know how to listen to one another, because we're so busy about what it is we're about to say, what we're thinking, what we're doing. And sometimes that is fear-based, and sometimes it's because we feel privileged to interrupt. So then justice, that was the favorite one I looked up. In visual thesaurus, when you put a word in, it opens the synonyms like a flower. It's so beautiful. You'll like it. And if you don't know how to speak it in English, it'll give you the sound for the word. So anyway, justice. That judgment that defines or assigns an award or a punishment. And so I start thinking, okay, that's true. I've experienced it. And most everybody in my family has experienced it. How many of you in this room have experienced that kind of assignment of award or punishment? But not always based on the actual facts. Yes. So then I thought about restorative justice, because I am a restorative justice practitioner. And you know about restorative justice?
Yes, I do very well.
And I have to read what I don't want to just say it. I looked up restorative as opposed to criminal justice. I don't know how those two words go together. It confuses me. Because I don't always know who the criminals are. Do you? So restorative is a beautiful word. To reinstate peace. And this one is my favorite. A medicine that strengthens and reinvigorates. So imagine restorative justice being good medicine. And that's what we want. It brought me joy to read that. So civic engagement is a compilation of all of these things that we do from the heart, not from our heads, not just by being great fact checkers and researchers, because that doesn't always tell the truth either, not the whole truth, but that we are looking for the story behind the story behind the story. As a historian, you know what I'm talking about. There's always more, and there's always more for us to learn. So that really struck me. All those definitions struck me as the basis of what we will talk about today.
Thank you so much. I think you bring up a really beautiful point about how we are very quick to judge, especially those who have been or are incarcerated, and automatically label them as criminals. Definitely is very important to kind of shed that stigma of people that are just solely what they've done.
At one point in their lives as well.
Yeah.
Whereas there are some of us who never enter a carceral site, and there are many, many things we have done and are continuing to do that go unchecked. It's very interesting how we're trained, how we're socialized, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
But if we were trained in that way as humans, that means we can undo that training if we do some inner work.
Thank you. So for our second question, you've spoken about the importance of spirituality and meditation in your work, and I was just curious to know how that relates to your personal experience with incarceration, and if you'd be willing to talk about the balance of selflessness in the struggle and the tangible act of self-care as a necessary part of revolutionary resistance.
Well, these flowers are very beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're helping me to answer your question.
Okay.
But I know I love flowers. I love them especially before they're cut. But after they're cut, somebody has to tend the water and clip the ends, or what will happen?
They won't look like this anymore.
And we are that way. We are living beings. These flowers were on living bushes and trees, but we are living beings. And our ecosystem, this delicate little worm ecosystem, deserves rest, peace, love, good company of her own and others. And she needs time for herself. Not just school time, work time, family time. She needs Lauren time, right? What happens when Lauren doesn't have that?
Oh.
Yeah, so, yeah. And we're all humans and we know about that. And so one of the things I learned when I was heartbroken doesn't describe it. My heart felt like shattered glass when I was first arrested and separated from my baby daughter, who I was still nursing. And I was this young widow, and I didn't know what to do with any of it except to tell you that I wanted the pieces of my heart to come back together. I'm so glad, if those are your children, that they're all with you. And yet, by the way, there are children at the borders and other places of these United States who are still separated from their mommies and daddies. That is so criminal. That is a crime. But to continue to answer your question, missing my daughter so was the impetus for me to learn to meditate. Because the prison regulation was, you will be able to see her, Huggins. They never called anybody by their whole name, for 1 hour every Saturday. I'm gonna let that sink in for you. Prisons are invisible communities, and we don't really know what goes on in them, do we? But we let them be. So, I said to myself, I cannot do this without something. There is no food, no anything that gives me solace. I need my own solace. So I asked a lawyer, one of the legal team, and they worked pretty much just because they were good people. I asked him to bring me a book on yoga, because I couldn't go out to walk, like the women in the general population of incarcerated people there at the women's prison. I couldn't walk anywhere, I couldn't go anywhere. It was just a small little stretch of floor. And so I wanted to move my body, but I also knew that I knew just a tiny bit about yoga, but I knew that the root of the word is yug, which means union. And I wanted this shattered heart to come back together. So my lawyer, Charles Gary, got me a book. And the postures were in black and white photos, and I taught myself how to do them. But the book said one thing that I've never forgotten. And after you move your body, after you do these postures, sit still a while. Notice your breath. And that's what I did. And I started feeling better about not the condition of the prison, but my place in my life. That I could experience something more than the sadness and the woundedness. Because I was beginning to feel that there is this great power inside me. But not just me, you and everybody in this room. And I didn't stop to ponder why I was never taught it. I just went with it. And my idea was not to cry when I spent that hour with my daughter. And that following couple of Saturdays, I was less teary. And I remember the Saturday when I walked in, and she was just a baby, but she was 2.5 by the time I was released. So I wanted to have conversation with her when she was old enough. And I remember being able to do that without crying, without giving her the heaviness that sometimes I felt. You know what I mean? And I was so happy that meditation was giving me the access to this unlimited strength and power inside me. And so after a few Saturdays, I didn't cry at all. And I laughed with her and I played with her. And I cried all the way back to the cell. But I wasn't giving her what she didn't need, understand, or deserve. And this is what also sustained me when I was in the courthouse, especially during the trial. I was able to walk in and sit in that chaos and in that demeaning environment and maintain some sense of myself. I hope that it was felt by Bobby and other people in the courtroom, but I knew it had to start with me. The change always begins inside us, doesn't it? So now when I when talking to people, I talk to young activists like yourself, especially young Black and brown women. And they come to me sometimes after I talk like this and they say, with big tears in their eyes, you mean it's okay for me to rest? You mean I can get a full night's sleep? You mean I could take a day off? I said, if you don't, you will burn to a frazzle and you will be of no use. You will not be able to serve. I learned it the hard way. But what is it that we're telling each other about what it means to serve humanity? If we're doing it from love, then first we have to start by loving ourselves, but not instead of serving people. It's not closed-fisted like that. Everything is simultaneous in its transformative power. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, more than answers it. I think I'm learning currently a lot about reading a book called Living a Feminist Life, and she talks specifically about basically how to incorporate self-care within your feminist lifestyle, and that this work is hard work, and that in order to keep that work going and to maintain it, you have to take time for yourself. So that stress is really important.
Right. And the idea that activists, that revolutionaries, that social justice workers don't need this is based in a male model. And what I mean to say is that the whole time that I have been an activist, I've been raising my own children. And now that they're all adults, I can see it happening in people your generation that have children. And the generation just below me. But that we don't socialize men to believe that they can take care of their children. Men do. I want to just say that I am not talking about the fact that men are not compassionate and empathic beings who can raise children. I'm not saying that at all, because that would be a lie. I'm just saying we don't train boys who become men to believe that they are supposed to take care of children. So more and more and more, there are mothers and fathers who are doing that. I spoke on a panel once called How to Raise Feminist Boys. Don't you love that?
I do. I don't have any children, don't plan on having any children anytime soon, Dad. But that's definitely something that I'm conscious about as somebody who is consciously and actively within feminist work. How do you implement this within kind of a counterpart society that often is hesitant to it because they frankly don't know it and don't get the chance to get to know it?
Feminism is not an ugly term any more than revolutionary is an ugly term. We are so trained to think that words are just what we're told they are. That's why I love exploring them. Who would think that social is synonymous with multi-ethnic? But of course, if we think about it for 2 seconds, we know that it is. If we're honest about the world we live in, as opposed to the bubbles that we love to think are the world. So, feminism is simply viewing the world from a woman's perspective, and then living with love for women and girls and boys. Leading with that love, as not an oh by the way. And so the women of the Black Panther Party came to the party feminist. But we didn't use that term then, because in the 1960s and 70s, that term had been held by white American women in such a way that we were not included. I wish I was making this up, but this is history that I'm talking about. For instance, bringing up forced sterilization as a part of reproductive rights, we were told that's not a feminist issue. What? When a woman can go into a hospital and have a triple ligation against her will, that is a feminist issue. So we had to work alongside people, but not directly with them until they could come along, until they could become re-educated. And that is the way that it is. You know, the ignorance is trained into us. And until somebody intervenes and says, can you think of it differently? Can you look at it another way? Could you look at it from my perspective? Could you step in my shoes and walk around for a minute? But sometimes privilege doesn't allow for a shift in perspective. So I'm glad that you're looking at the world in this way and that you're willing to talk to the people in your life about the beauty of it. Because it is beautiful, because women are beautiful, because women's bodies are sacred. All bodies are sacred, but a woman's body is uniquely outfitted to bring humanity to the planet. Every time I think of that, it just is so mind-boggling. I was with a 2-week-old baby last week, and his mom and I were talking about this little brown boy in front of us, so tiny. We were talking about what a mystical experience it is to birth a child. And yet, when the babies get here, there are people who do not want them in their schools, in their cities, but want them in the prisons and the jails. Before they're old enough to even talk, we've decided where they will end up. The big we. I'm not talking about the people in our room. But I'm a human, so I say the big we. So that's why I go back into the prisons, because I am a feminist woman. And I don't care that the people I talk to are men or women or boys or girls. And the juvenile prisons are the most heartbreaking because they do not belong there. There is another way. There's so many other ways that countries all over the world are trying with community programs and so on. So, but that's another conversation for another time. I'm just so grateful to hear that you consider yourself feminist.
Thank you so much. So for our next question, Black people are beautifully diverse, as we see here in front of us, as we see here out into our audience.
Yes.
So I was just curious to know if you've experienced people asking you to neglect or omit parts of yourself within the struggle for liberation.
Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the end of the sentence. Question number 4.
Almost every part of who I am, someone says something about it to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not okay when it happens, it stings. But then I realize what my purpose on planet Earth is, to love and to share it. I've always known that since I was a little girl. That isn't some nice words, because love is fierce. It is fierce. That TV kind of love, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about love. And it means that I find something in another human that is within me. Or I see something in another human that is like something in me, that I'm constantly looking for a connection. It isn't, it's not an activity. It's something that meditation has taught me. Because on the inside, there isn't any, let's call it, difference, duality. But the world we live in is full of it. And in order to remain sane, I can't live in all of those silo formations. It's ridiculous. But, you know, since I was 15 and went to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, somebody in my family, my mother's church, or somewhere had something to say about how I show up in the world. And I can just remember right now, one of my neighbors had said to my mother's first name is Cosette. That's my middle name. Cosette, you're gonna have to pull reins on that girl. And she said, what do you mean? My daughter's very quiet. Well, yeah, but if she don't like something, I tell her. She just look at me. She said, yeah, because I told her not to say anything to adults. Yeah. But she has her way of looking at the world. I've never forgot, my mother told me this years later, that there were all these neighbors that were they wanted to rein me in, and so did she, and so did some of my peers. And when I said that I don't fit in on the spectrum of sexuality in any one particular and well-defined place, oh my goodness, you would have thought I said that I was going to stand naked in the middle of 55th Street. It didn't compute for the training and the socialization. But also, when I really took on the work of the Black Panther Party, and I really believed that all people deserve to be treated fully as humans in terms of land and housing and food and clothing and justice and peace. That's a part of the Black Panther Party's 10-point program. Then people said, but not these ones. Well, what about those ones? But not these. And I was a part of a movement at a time when poor white people from the Appalachian Mountains and Puerto Rican and Mexican people from the West and the East Coast and Black people of all descriptions were working together in coalitions. I wish for that again.
Thank you so much again. Just sitting here is like really insane to me. It is, I'm kind of malfunctioning over here.
So I hope it's good insane.
Oh no, like I just can't even process exactly that this is happening in front of me, really. Like, this feels like a fever dream or something.
Well, I think your father's recording. Are you recording?
See, so I get to relive it again. So,
did you know she was special when she, from the very beginning? Definitely. See?
Thank you so much.
We all, okay, let me tell you this story. This is for you. This is for all the Black and brown and other women of color in the room. I was in the Trader Joe's. You know Trader Joe's. Wherever it is, you know Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in the Trader Joe's buying something small because it's my partner's birthday on Thursday. And she wanted this ridiculous little treat. And I went in there to get it, like, oh, okay. And I got it. And I got in the short line, the basket only line.
Yeah.
And this young Black woman walked up to me and she said, "Are you Ericka?" And I said, "Yeah. I'm Vanessa, and I'm so honored to meet you. What words do you have for a young Black woman?" It was so touching. It was so intimate. And I just let the line go on past me, and I just talked to her. I said, "Love yourself. In all of your beauty, love yourself exactly as you are without changing anything, modifying anything, and do it out loud." Like out loud. Thank you. Out loud, I mean, not just with words. When I was we were at the Black Joy Parade in Oakland. Wasn't that the most uplifting? Because sometimes we get all stuck in suffering or allow other people to center us in suffering. And this young woman's face at the Trader Joe's lit up and tears filled her eyes. And she said, "That is the best thing that anybody outside my family has told me." I have to believe it's true. I said, yeah, keep talking to yourself like that. That you're magnificent and brilliant and valuable beyond compare. There is nothing broken about you or wrong or flawed. And I talked like that for a few minutes, and then I said, okay, I gotta go and get this thing. But it uplifted me to have her ask that question. So I guess what I want to say is that we have to be available to one another. We can't expect people who do not get us to love us in that way, but we can do it for one another.
Thank you so much again. I can't even, I'm just gonna thank you the whole night. This is insane. Okay, question number 4. How can young people improve conditions in their neighborhoods today?
To see whatever is right in front of you and find some like-minded people and do something about it. That's what the Black Panther Party did. We had 65 community survival programs. We were median age 19 years old. And we said, government won't feed the babies breakfast? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because some babies get breakfast in the morning and they get lunch. And more often than not, they have dinner as well. The government won't do it. Okay, we'll do it. Free breakfast for children program. And the federal government got so embarrassed by that free breakfast and lunch program that they created the National Free Breakfast and Lunch Program that feeds children to this day. However, I know it's not the quality that we gave in the church basements, but children don't have to be hungry. The food might be nasty, but they don't have to be hungry. So that's how we did it. We created, the doctors were doctors who are trained very well, were trained to believe that because of ignorance, that sickle cell anemia, strikes people of African and Mediterranean descent, was pernicious anemia. They're two completely different things, and sickle cell is very painful. And so we would visit these clinics and hospitals, and they say, well, we don't have a program. Okay. So we got card tables, little square tables with folding legs, and sat on street corners, and we had doctor friends who taught med students and party members who had some kind of medical background to do finger pricks. And we would have people tested for sickle cell. And that led to a sickle cell research and education institute. We just did it. We were not waiting for permission. I think now everybody wants permission and or money. We didn't have a penny. Not a penny. But because we were doing a good thing at the right time with the right people, people supported us with funding. With the clinics, doctors worked free. Specialists worked free at our clinics. Can you believe that? But that started a whole set of community clinics. Some of them still exist all over the country, in every big city in the United States, because we had chapters of the Black Panther Party in almost every city, major city in the United States, and some small cities as well. And then we were in India, Africa, and parts of Europe and South America. And do you know something? Those community survival programs are still being replicated without anybody ever meeting anybody who was a human member of the Black Panther Party, just by reading about it. You can do something. I met a 19-year-old when I visited Brazil. I was in Sao Paulo, and it was one of the most magnificent trips I've ever taken. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Brazil, go there, you will see yourself. You will see yourself and everybody you know. But that isn't what we're taught here. So I was at the students there are really amazing. Because you see, they didn't have a civil rights movement. That slavery, the end of slavery. So they had no process for re-education or anything, so they're still struggling, trying to say basic things like, we are Africans in Brazil, the Afro-Brazilians. So anyway, this particular day, a student came to me and he said, can you come and speak at my school? And their federal institutions are like our California state universities or our state universities. And I went there thinking 25 or 30 students would show up. There were 300 students. It was the next day. They don't play. And there was a young man from one of the favelas. We use the term ghetto, and we use it lightly to describe a broken nail or something. No, the poverty in the favelas is inhuman, that it can be like that. And it's not the fault of the people who are living in those conditions of poverty. Anyway, he said in Portuguese, and it was translated for me, he said, I found an old Black Panther Party newspaper, and in it I read about the free food programs all over the United States and wherever the Black Panther Party existed. That newspaper I found was from the 1970s, and it was all tattered. It had been passed around and passed around. And it wasn't in Portuguese, but I had a friend who translated. And what I got was that you get the food, you give it away to the people who need. That's exactly what we did. We went to the big box stores like Safeway, other big stores like Costco, and we got the food and we gave it to people in need. He said, so after reading that newspaper, I thought I could do this. There's nothing wrong with me. And maybe if I tell people who I know, they will help me. And now I have a free food program in my favela. You see? I think we're waiting on some kind of permission or writing the perfect proposal or this, but I find like with houselessness in Oakland, people aren't walking by as much anymore. People are trying to figure out how to give resources to houseless people. They're not there intentionally. And in terms of food, the community